Coming up on Network Africa, more than 70 people killed and 1,000 arrested in South Africa unrest. African Union calls for urgent restoration of order, peace and stability in South Africa. Plus, Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed accuses TPLF of starting fight along aid corridors in Tigray. Hello and a warm welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shoboale. Violence and looting has raged in South Africa for the 6th day running, stoking fears of food and petrol shortages. More than 70 people have now died in the unrest sparked by the jailing of former President Jacob Zuma last week.
This is the moment a baby is thrown from a burning building by her mother to save her life. She's caught by a group of young men and women. This is just one of the chaotic scenes that have emerged from South Africa in the aftermath of protests which erupted over the jailing of former South African President Jacob Zuma. Over 70 people have been killed. Many of the deaths in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal provinces occurred in chaotic stampedes as thousands of people stole food, electric appliances, liquor, and clothing from stores. Shopping malls and warehouses have been ransacked or set ablaze in several cities, mostly in Zuma's home in KwaZulu-Natal province and the financial and economic center Johannesburg and surrounding Gauteng province. More than 1,200 people have been arrested in the lawlessness. On Tuesday, some COVID-19 vaccination centers were closed, disrupting urgently needed inoculations. Protests triggered by the jailing of ex-President Jacob Zuma for failing to appear at a corruption inquiry last week widened into looting and an outpouring of general anger over the hardship and inequality that persist 27 years after the end of apartheid. About 2,500 soldiers have been sent onto the streets to help outnumbered police contain the unrest.
Our South Africa Bureau Chief Betty Dibia spoke to Professor Chris Isike, President of the African Association of Political Science, on the implications of the latest violence and the role of former President Jacob Zuma.
It is to some extent about Zuma, but behold, everything we're seeing now is what I call a combination of organized violence and protest looting. Protest looting as different from, looting that accompanies, protests before now. This is there's now an economy that people are enjoying from protests. So when people, for example, have needs, they just kind of wait for the next protest to meet those needs. So there's an economy that is emerging from that. But apart from that, and which is also a function of the criminality we see, apart from that, this is organized deliberately by a section of the political class to destabilize the country and give a semblance of inability, a semblance of weakness from the part of the ruling class, especially the president.
The president addressed the nation twice in 24 hours, and he's been criticized quite a lot about probably the body language or the toughness of his words to the people, even while announcing that the SANDF will be deployed. How is the handling so far of this? Could it have been prevented, to get to this point? Because the signs were there.
Yes, the signs were there. Many people have said that it's a failure of intelligence because if they ought to have been intelligence gathering even before the arrest of the president. The intelligence should have picked up that there was going to be a reaction of some sort. Some of these things have been threatened by sectors of the political class before now. There was talk about making the country ungovernable, not just by even not directly by former President Zuma, but close associates of his. So I would say that there's been a failure in that regard. And there's also been um, a, I would call it a weakness in terms of how slow the response has been. If they are measured, if they are deliberate, the government would have been able to achieve the whole purpose of public law and order policing, with of course working with the military to deter people, because the whole idea of public maintaining law and order is deterrence. But there needs to be cooperation, a sync between intelligence, between the police, and between the military, because the military don't have intelligence. They just stay on the streets to prevent these actions from happening. But they need to then get intelligence about where these operations are going to happen next, so that they can be stationed in those places to prevent these occurrences.
Yes. Now, if you were the president's advisor, what would you be telling him? We've heard calls for state of emergency, some nationwide, some to the 2 provinces where this has been going on. What would you be saying to him if you had the opportunity?
If I were the president, I would be doing a lot of messaging, target aspect of it all, and sending messages that can rally the entire country behind him in his belief, especially to support his anti-corruption agenda, and indicating that there's going to be arrest of those masterminds, because those are the important actors. The looters are opportunists. Okay, so the focus shouldn't be too much on them. Of course, we can deter them, but the real targets that I would be targeting as president, it's not just it's the masterminds, not just to arrest them, but to delegitimize them by making them look as enemies of the state.
Meanwhile, in Durban, some residents are defending their neighborhoods with guns and baseball bats amid widespread looting and violence. They've also put up roadblocks to recover stolen goods, saying if people could not produce receipts for the goods in their vehicles, they would report them to the police.
In a Durban neighborhood, residents have taken matters into their own hands. Amidst widespread violence in South Africa, they've armed themselves with guns and baseball bats to block access to their streets and to chase looters out of local supermarkets. Protests following the jailing of former President Jacob Zuma have been centered on his home province of KwaZulu-Natal and have evolved into a general outpouring of anger. Shopping malls have burned, dozens of people killed, and soldiers sent into the streets. The government has said criminals are taking advantage of the anger among Zuma supporters to steal and cause damage. But the unrest is also fueled by exasperation at difficult living conditions that have worsened during the pandemic. On Tuesday, the United Nations in South Africa warned that the violence will only exacerbate the hardship caused by poverty, unemployment, and inequality. Concerns are growing over the impact of the unrest on food and fuel supply. At a gas station in Durban, crowds queue for petrol and food.
The people starting fire, the shops, everything, that's why the queue for petrol is like this. Because it's supposed to put the petrol pint on Chatsworth, but I can't because now there's fire everywhere.
The violence is also hitting the economy. The rand, one of the best performing emerging market currencies during the pandemic, hit a 3-month low on Tuesday and continues to hover there on Wednesday. Local and hard currency bonds have suffered, and shares in banks and real estate firms also tanked.
Well, the African Union has waded into the situation, condemning the violence that has left at least 72 people dead. In a statement, the AU Commission chairperson, Musa Faki Mohammed, described as appalling the scenes of the looting of public and private property. The chairperson of the AU called for an urgent restoration of order, peace and stability in the country in full respect of the rule of law. Mr. Mohammed says the failure to resolve the crisis would have grave impacts for the country and the region. Well, the violence isn't only affecting those in South Africa. The government of the Federal Republic of Somalia has expressed deep concerns about the riots and looting in which 4 Somalis have been killed and several others injured and their shops looted. Somalia says it's calling on the South African government to exert all its effort to protect Somali citizens from brutal acts to ensure the safety of their lives and property. The Somali government adds that it's proud of its historical relations with the people of South Africa during their struggle against apartheid and the extent of the mutual economic and strategic support it provided over a period of time. Meanwhile, lorries owned by Mozambicans have been looted and set on fire by protesters. Mozambique's Federation of Road Transport Association says no injuries or fatalities have been reported among their drivers. The incidents happened in Durban, in KwaZulu-Natal province, and elsewhere in Gauteng province. Transport operators fear the situation will worsen in the coming days. The crossing between Mozambique and South Africa is usually busy but has been drastically affected, first because of the tightening of COVID-19 restrictions and now because of the riots and looting. On Tuesday, only 3 passenger transport cars left from Mozambique for South Africa. And away from the situation in South Africa to Ethiopia's Tigray crisis, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has accused the Tigray People's Liberation Front of starting to fight along aid corridors. The TPLF, the former ruling party of Tigray, which was ousted in November by the army, has since joined forces with other groups to form the rebel Tigray Defense Force. Rebels captured the regional capital, Mekelle, last month, and the government withdrew its troops and unilaterally declared a humanitarian ceasefire to allow farming activity to take place and for aid to be delivered. But the TPLF demanded a negotiated truce with conditions, including the complete withdrawal of Eritrean troops and the regional Amara forces. In a statement, Mr. Abiy also accused the international community of silence about what he said was the TPLF's recruitment of child soldiers, his first comments on the issue since Tigrayan forces launched their new offensive. Meanwhile, United Nations humanitarians have appealed for better access to Ethiopia's embattled Tigray region after the first aid trucks in days to reach the local capital, Mekelle, encountered multiple rigorous checks which delayed their arrival significantly. The UN Foods Programme, WFP, says unobstructed and aid deliveries are crucial in the northern Ethiopian region, where 4 million people need emergency food assistance after more than 8 months of conflict between regional and central government forces.
A United Nations World Food Programme WFP convoy of 50 trucks arrived in the Tigrayan capital of Mekelle Monday with 900 metric tons of food as well as other emergency supplies. It was the first humanitarian convoy to reach Tigray since WFP restarted operations in the northwest on 2 July following fight. What is important here is to note that the convoys are going through rigorous checks. It should not be like that. We need to send in convoys every day from now on so that we are able to meet demand. We therefore are appealing for a quicker and smoother passage into the region as soon as possible. Of the 50 trucks, 29 truckloads transported food commodities comprising of wheat, split peas, and vegetable oil, enough to cover the most pressing urgent food needs of 200,000 people for a week.
Still to come on the program. Female Somali MP declares her candidacy for upcoming presidential elections. More details in a moment. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. Ethiopia has described as unhelpful the intervention of the United Nations in a long-running dispute over its controversial Nile River Dam. The country's Foreign Affairs Ministry says in a statement that it's regrettable to witness that the progress of negotiations has been dragged and politicized. The huge dam, known as the Grand Ethiopia Renaissance Dam, GERD, has been a point of dispute for a decade between Addis Ababa and downstream nations Egypt and Sudan. Ethiopia said on Tuesday that the African Union-led process was important in addressing the concerns of the three concerns and that it was committed to seeing the process to a successful conclusion. Ethiopia says the project is essential to its development and started filling it, but the two other countries fear it could restrict their citizens' water access. Some health matters now. Angolan health authorities have said malaria cases in the country are on the decline. This year, more than 5,000 people have died from malaria in the oil-rich nation. But the Secretary of State for Public Health, Franco Mofinda, is quoted as saying that the government has distributed test kits and drugs across the country to combat the epidemic. This means that fewer cases and fatalities are now being recorded. Mr. Mofinda gave an example of a hospital in Huambo City where there were 300 patients at the beginning of this year's epidemic. But during his last visit, he said only 56 were being treated for malaria. According to the Severe Malaria Observatory, Angola is among the 10 countries with the highest number of malaria cases and deaths in the world. A female Somali MP has declared her candidacy for upcoming presidential elections in the country. Fawzia Yusuf Adam has joined the male-dominated pool of candidates for the October the 10th vote. Ms. Adam is a former Deputy Prime Minister and a former Foreign Affairs Minister. She will run against the incumbent Mohamed Abdullahi Mohamed, also known by his nickname Famajo, and two other former presidents, among others. Mrs. Adam says she will breathe a new lease of life into Somalia. Somali leaders agreed to hold presidential elections in October after a long standoff. The election delay caused by the failure of some regional leaders to participate in election talks led to protests. Somali elections are held indirectly with clan representatives tasked with the responsibility of voting. Well, let's head over to Tunisia now to meet Zora Trabelsi, a widow and mother of 8. The 75-year-old is in a profession more commonly practiced by men in Tunisia, and especially in Nabuel, a coastal town approximately 68 kilometers east of the capital, Tunis. But she's not letting that stop her. Take a look.
At the break of dawn, fisherwoman Zora Trabelsi rises and heads to Sidi Rais Beach in Tunisia's northeastern town of Nabuel, where she boards a modest fishing boat and sets sail in the rich Mediterranean. For the 75-year-old mother of 8, fishing is not simply a source of income, but a passion that gives her meaning and comfort.
Do you know why I love the sea? I love it because of the things I faced in it, the torment and fatigue I tasted in it. When I cannot visit the sea, I don't know what will happen to me. For me, it's as if I was born of the sea and it was born of me. When I feel that I am in a bad state or if I am facing certain challenges, I come to the sea. I talk to it. I talk about my pain and I cry. When I finish, it's as if I'm a new person.
Having worked in fishing since the age of 16, her male peers have grown to respect her and have long accepted her as one of their own.
My mother is the only woman who is still working in a field dominated by men. She stayed till this moment because she loves the sea. When there is rain and we can't work, she comes here alone to watch the sea. She loves the sea.
The fisherwoman's trade is not an easy one, compelling her to spend 8 hours a day at sea, 7 days a week, fishing from 4 a.m. to 12 p.m. Despite the countless difficulties faced, Trabelsi says perseverance and hard work can never be abandoned, whatever her mental or physical condition.
I faced many difficulties. If I don't work, I won't get anything in return. No one will give you anything. You must persevere and work hard to make a living. In the morning, I must come to work despite my mental and physical condition. Healthy or sick, I need to work.
The coronavirus pandemic has been her most recent challenge as fish prices plummeted in her village, further straining her financial burdens. But she's determined to carry on, confident the storm will pass.
Over in Egypt, the government has moved to impose legislation on tricycle owners, popularly known as tuk-tuk. The government says the owners should either license the three-wheeled vehicles or replace them with minivans.
To some, they are nuisance as they weave through traffic on Egypt's chaotic city streets or zip down narrow alleyways. To others, they're a cheap way of getting from A to B in a fraction of time it takes on public transport. Now the government wants to regulate tuk-tuks, free-wheeled motorized rickshaws, by introducing a national licensing system and nudging drivers to convert to natural gas-powered minibuses.
If they will license the tuk-tuks, then I agree. But the thing about a car, how will I pay the installment? What about apartment rental? I want one thing, this tuk-tuk, I am willing to license and drive it.
Officials estimate there may be as many as 4 million tuk-tuks in Egypt, but they are either unlicensed or licensed under a patchwork of local rules.
This gives us comfort when we're tired. Whenever I call him, he comes straight away and takes me wherever I want to go. If I take a car, I will have to wait for an hour or two by the time it gets here.
Often decked out with fluorescent lights and powerful sound systems, they are mostly youthful drivers fearlessly venture onto highways, squeeze through improbable gaps in traffic, and swerve between oncoming cars. The government says licensing them will help trace those responsible for accidents or crimes, prevent underage driving, and provide drivers with insurance and a pension.
Directions were issued by the Prime Minister that tuk-tuks should be part of the initiative, but this participation will take place through 2 phases. The first phase is to legalize the conditions of the tuk-tuk on Egyptian streets so that the tuk-tuk is granted licenses, which allows them to have basic legal data in traffic units and a local unit in affiliated governorates.
Some drivers welcome the licensing plan, but oppose trading in their tuk-tuks for minivans. Drivers and passengers say they are not easily replaced.
That's the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Teniola Shuboale. Bye for now.